Hey everyone, welcome to our next installment of the Buyer First Ask Me Anything. I am Carole Mahoney, your host, and I'm thrilled to be joined by my first guest today, Tonya Bjurstrom from Dirby Solutions. Now, Tonya and I have gotten into many a conversation both on the phone and on social media about being buyer first and customer first. And if there is one person that I wanted to bring on first, it was Tonya, because she is known as the voice of the customer for B2B. She delivers insights to clients that they need to grow their revenue and their profit, secure customer retention, which seems to be the name of the day today, and elevate the customer experience and build the confidence that they're on the right path. She's had a long and broad and successful career in sales, in marketing, and in business development. She's worked with startups, with small businesses, with large global organizations. But despite whatever the size or the role of the company, Tonya's always been skilled with curiosity, which is one of my favorite things about her. Like me, she loves to ask why. Her genius is knowing how to ask the right questions in the right way to uncover those insights that are just invaluable. So we're going to dive right into this. But if you're new to our program, you might be wondering, why am I so obsessed with being buyer first? I can cite stats for you that come from LinkedIn State of Sales report. And the most recent report says that one of the top 5 things that buyers value in sellers is their ability to challenge the way they think about their current situations. That we actually can build trust that way, which I think Tonya has a little bit something to say about that. So now is the time to start typing in your questions. If you're joining us live anywhere, we want to hear, what are you most wondering about? What is the question you would be dying to hear from Tonya after all of the customers that she's interviewed that you can maybe apply to your organization today? So go ahead, type those questions into the pane. I have Lou, my wizard behind the curtains, keeping an eye on it for us. So if we don't have a chance to get to it, don't worry. I'm sure Tonya and I will be able to cover that either in our next session or even later on social media. So my very first question, though, was one that I have been dying to ask Tonya for pretty much since I met her. And Tonya, I would love to hear this because I think you have some real insight here as to how much does the buying experience really matter later on when people become a customer? I mean, is it like a do-all, be-all kind of a thing, or is it just marginally of an impact?
It's a significant impact, which is one of the reasons why I love the term that you have coined of buyer first, because to me, that has multiple meanings. Buyer first meaning your buyer comes first. Their needs come first, right? The old adage of, I have a hammer, so everything is a nail. I think, it does not work. That has been proven, right? So it's the focus of the buyer, but also buyer first in the perspective of the customer experience. The buyer experience begins from the very first interaction they have with your brand. It is from the very beginning that customer experience clock starts ticking. And in a lot of the interviews that I do for my clients with their customers, we ask questions about the buying process, about the sales process, and not only around why they bought the product, because that is a question that even though a lot of companies think they know why their buyers bought their product, it isn't. Their own assumption and bias plays a big role in those determinations, but also in regard to how that relationship started and, kind of what baggage they're carrying. And, I have a really specific example of that where I completed a program for one of my clients, and we did an interview with someone that they would consider to be one of their key customers. She was an industry leader. She had helped them to expand within her organization. It's a very large international organization. And what we found is we started asking the right questions of this particular customer, is even though she believed in the product, she always had her guard up in regard to the salespeople that she worked with. Because what she found was in the sales process, they had promised some features and functions that were not in the solution, that my client had not delivered. And so, she had made the decision, she had moved forward, she was committed to the platform, but it never left. And she carried it with her throughout the entire process. And it primarily had the impact when it came to asking her to be a referral for other potential customers, because she said, well, I'll do it because I do believe in the product. But when I'm a referral, I tell the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the ugly here is that they need to be cautious on what they hear from the sales rep during the buying process, because it might not be delivered.
Yeah.
That was just a slap in the face to my client. They did not know that's how she felt. So, they really had to change how they sold and what it looked like moving forward for them.
Yeah. And it's not just your client that I hear this from. I actually just got off of a coaching call with another salesperson who was coming into an account, and the person who was leading the effort at the company to make some kind of a change happen said, look, I don't want to be sold to. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want you, I don't want all of these things that you're going to do. I know what I need to do, and I will let you know when I want to talk to you. And she had, like your client had, like there were things that someone had told her previously in a previous sales engagement with this same company that wasn't actually the truth of the matter. And that, for lack of a better word, poisoned her mind against anyone else talking to her from this company. And here's the kicker of it, is that she's now looking at a solution that doesn't meet her needs, and she's going down a wrong path, and she's going to be met up with some roadblocks and frustrations later on because of the buying experience that she had before. She's not open to listening to what might actually be able to help her. So not only is the salesperson losing and the company losing, but the customer, the buyer is losing out as well.
Yeah.
And like we think in terms of, oh, that's so damaging for the company, but what about the damage being done to the person who has the problem? Right?
Right.
That makes my heart hurt.
Well, because it's, and I think this case, as well as in the case that I brought up, what the ultimate decision of the buyer in that circumstance is. Astute buyers take multiple factors into consideration. And if they don't have another technically viable solution to move forward with, they may still choose the one that they, don't have full trust with. But that isn't indicative of what a long-term relationship should look like. And it probably isn't going to be a great long-term relationship, because as soon as a viable technology comes along, which it will, guess what? That customer is going to look at that other option. They want to work with people they trust. So it starts early.
Yeah. So Michael actually asked an interesting question here. And that is, like, he's been interviewing customers recently after they go live and finding that, contrary to what he thought, that the dollar savings wasn't the primary motivator for them to deploy their solution. And they were all citing strategic value, doing things better, being more efficient. And he's finding that buyers now seem to be so focused on wanting to talk about, now they want to talk about cost savings. How does he deal with that disconnect? What advice would you give him?
So I find this as well. I have a client that I worked with who was really challenged around discounting their solution in order to win every deal. They thought that that's what they had to do, that they had to offer a discount because that was the industry standard. And, buyers are trained to push for the hard value or the hard dollar costs. They are trained to get the absolute best price possible. So I think that taking this approach that Michael's taking and having some interviews with customers after the process is complete is significant. And having, as much as possible, some really honest conversations around whether or not they would have still bought the solution if he hadn't have discounted, if he had not let pricing be the driving decision or the driver of the buying conversation. And if I always think as well, having a third party have those conversations is really great. So, of course, in what I do, I think having an outside third party like Dirby is the best option. But if that isn't an option for somebody to have a third party outside of the organization have that conversation, at least have somebody else in your organization have that conversation. Because if you're the person that is now moving forward with this relationship, even if you have a great relationship with your customer, a great relationship with your buyer, they're still a buyer. And they are still going to be conscious of the fact that they are going to be negotiating with you moving forward. So having a conversation that uncovers insight that is not part of a sales conversation, not part of the relationship with a salesperson, can uncover some insight that can't be uncovered otherwise.
Because we all have our biases, right? The person asking the question has a bias. The person answering the question
has exactly right.
Yes. There, it's even more biased. They don't want to upset you, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. So gaining that understanding outside of a sales conversation is important.
Yeah. And I think also too, if you think about our current economic environment, everyone's a little bit skittish. Everyone's looking for more cost savings and more efficiencies. So, to Michael, one of the things that I might say is if they originally bought because they needed to be more efficient and they needed to do things better, is to look at and revisit with them. So what exactly does efficient mean for you right now? Is it strictly cost savings, or are there other areas where you feel that you need to have more efficiencies for cost savings? And so maybe it's not so much of a discount of something, but maybe there's a value add that we can add into our solution to help you to get to those efficiencies. Maybe something that wasn't included in the original scope that we can give you at either that we can include in as a loyal customer to help you to get the cost savings that you're looking for, because everybody's trying to tighten their budgets right now. It's kind of like when you are in the beginning of a sales process, when instead of discounting, you either look at the scope or you look at something else that you can add or change in that scope in order to meet where they are at. But I love the idea of having that third party, because you're right. We put our own biases into our questions, and then the person who's answering that question based on our relationship might not want to tell us the hard truth of something, like you've learned with some of your clients.
Yeah.
Which actually leads me to my next question. What about the buying experience have you found is most important to customers later on? I mean, there's this transparency I'm hearing, do what you say you can do. Don't promise things that you can't do. What else?
One of the most common pieces of feedback that we receive, and it feels a little cliche, but it is true, is customers believing they have been heard. Customers believing they have truly been heard, and that their vendor partner is doing everything that they can to act on delivering what they need. Doesn't mean it even has to be delivered. If it's promised, yes, it has to be delivered. But that buyer knowing they've been heard, the vendor partner has explored every possible means. We can't give it to you, but this is how we can address the solution, is often just shy of being as valuable as actually delivering it. So that would be the thing that through all the industries, all the interviews, all of the sizes of customers, all of the different types of products, that seems to be the most common feedback that we hear.
One thing I might add to that too is that when we say we want to be heard, it's at an individual level, isn't it? Right? What one person, how they feel heard versus another person, how they feel heard, might be a little bit different. But we have to make sure that we're doing that with each person who's involved in the buying process, that everyone feels like they've been heard and that their concerns, their questions have been addressed, as well as everybody's as a whole. Because I see that's what happens. We have so many people that are involved in the decision-making process. We tend to only pay attention to the one person who has the ultimate buying authority. Theirs is the opinion who only matters. And that's how sometimes our other buyers feel like they haven't been heard. And so when people change roles or people move up in the organization, they still remember that they were ignored.
Yeah, agreed. And how many times is it that the person who's actually made the buying decision is not the person that's moving forward with managing the product or service that you're delivering?
Yeah, exactly.
It's very common. And so, You're right. So making sure that you truly have a grasp on everyone that's involved and what each of those individual needs are, not just the cumulative need. What's the stat? You know this better than I do. How many different people are involved now in a buying process? I think last I heard was like 7, 12,
Yeah, between
something
5
like
and
that.
7 up to 12, depending on the organization.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot to juggle, but it is what sales is today.
Yeah. Yes. Get good at herding cats.
Yes.
And I even find myself in this situation. I have a client that I'm working with where the sales leader brought in one of our solutions and excluded some of the people who would be impacted by this. And despite the fact that I asked, hey, what are their thoughts? Oh no, they'll do whatever we tell them to. Turns out that wasn't exactly true. And so now I'm having to deal with someone who felt like they were blindsided by this. They don't know what's going on. And so there's a lot of resistance there because the person who was making the buying decision didn't include them. So, sometimes it's our fault, sometimes it's the buyer, but we have to make sure that we're asking those questions and getting everybody involved and feeling included and feeling heard and listened to. What do you think are some of the best ways? Actually, let me ask this question in reverse. What are some of the things that you see sellers do that make buyers feel like they're not being heard?
I think one of the things is sticking to the script. Right. Which kind of goes back to making sure that you genuinely understand why buyers buy from you. Right. Like I said, sales today is not easy. It is challenging. It is hard. There's a lot of herding of the cats. And so when you're looking at the materials that need to be delivered to your potential customers, to your buyers, the market messaging, if that is out of line with why the majority of your buyers buy from you, you've got an extra challenge right out the gate. Yeah, before you really even get any momentum in that buying process, you already have to address the fact that you're not communicating well to your buyers. So I think that that's one of the really important things is doing the work to make sure that you understand why your ideal customers buy from you right out the gate. Make sure your messaging resonates.
Yeah. And don't make assumptions. I
Yes.
assume that they know this, or I assume that they need this because it's a no-brainer. Don't assume anything because, the old saying, when you assume, you make a you-know-what out of me and you, or you and me. So when we talk about what milestones are important in the buying and customer journey, what have you been hearing? What are the most critical milestones that we need to pay attention to as sellers?
I think the first one that actually ties back to this conversation and making sure you have everyone involved, that you're listening to everyone that's going to be engaged with your solution, is onboarding. So that is a bit of an opportunity to reset some of the ways in which you may not have fully addressed client needs, that you may have not fully delivered during the buying process. Is after a customer has the solution deployed, you really need to check back in and have that onboarding discussion to review what happened in the sales process, review what happened when delivering the product or service, make sure that you know who are the players now. Yes, you knew who the players were in the buying process, but those may not be the players that are truly engaged with the solution today. And so make sure that it's just, you're on the same page with that customer, and give you a chance to reset some expectations and to recalibrate some issues around trust or delivery or performance. So that's one of the keys. Another milestone that I think gets missed is around major support incidents. I think that after a major support incident, and this refers more to technology, of course, but it can refer to, manufacturing, it can refer to healthcare, really any significant issue that occurs with a customer, you need to, after that fact, have that third party, whether it be outside of your organization or somebody internal, to make sure that everything and everyone is okay with what the result was, because there are a lot of times where relationships go south, where even if the customer is saying, okay, we're good, we're satisfied with, where things ended up with this, they just may be a non-controversial person, or they just may be tired of the conflict, right? So having that discussion to make sure that that customer relationship is really stable, it's critical. And a lot of companies miss that because they just want it done. They just want to be able to say solution resolved, and now let's move on.
Yeah. I don't know if you caught the latest episode of Lori Richardson's Women in Sales podcast interview, where they were talking about having difficult conversations. And it was, the conversation was focused on how do you as a manager or a leader have a difficult conversation with one of your team members. But this applies here as well, right? Like this major support issue. I think Lori told the story of someone had spilled wine all over her husband's shirt, and the waiter couldn't even look at them in the eye or apologize. Like, let's just talk about the pink elephant in the room. You just had a major issue. How are you feeling about that right now? Right? Like we just want to we just want to sweep the uncomfortableness aside because it's awkward. But what I hear you saying is that we actually need to lean into that because they're feeling a certain way about it. And if we don't address it, then it's just going to fester.
That's absolutely right. And you need to be conscious of creating space for the customer to feel comfortable having that conversation. Right. Because otherwise it's, it just builds and builds and builds.
And, you had mentioned in the first part, like making sure that you're being on the same page with everyone in your company that your client is in. Because client needs change. And I think that's what Michael was talking about here is that, we started here, they went live, and now suddenly something has changed with them. I think what Michael's doing is so important, maybe because I've also coached him, FYI. But it's this whole idea is as a salesperson, you've made a promise. And so, yes, you have customer support and you have account management and customer success. But as a salesperson, I want to know that the promise I made was kept. And because it's my word on the line, because they're going to come back to me and say, what you said was going to happen didn't happen. And it also kind of brings in that third party. How is onboarding going? How has that support issue been resolved for you? And not that you can do anything about it, but you can make more noise about it. You can relay that feedback to your team because you're not the one that has that issue with them. But it also, by having that cadence of keeping in touch with your customers after the sale, it allows you to see what changes and trends are happening and changing. So John Noonan asks a great question here. He wants to know, what's a good way to encourage your champion to include others in the company that are going to be affected by this when they use your product or service? So, in other words, you ask the question, who else is impacted by this? And they say no one.
Right.
You really believe that? Come on. So what's the best way to get them involved?
That's a tough one. I think where I have found success, both in my previous life, I worked in sales forever. Actually starting when I was 15 years old. So it's literally been like all I've ever done before.
Once you're in, you're never out. Like it's like the
yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So one of the ways that I have found is working to understand from the champion perspective, what are their interests outside of just this particular purchase? What are their interests within their organization? And how can I support them in looking really good? How can I support them in helping to make this decision, not only a decision to, work with a particular product or service, particular vendor, but a decision that can help position them for the next position within the company, position them within their industry. Maybe they like speaking at industry events. Okay, great. What industry events do you go to? Okay, so how could we get engaged in not only having this be a purchase, but have this be a case study? And if that's what we're going to do, then we probably need to have some other people within your organization that are lending credibility and feedback and telling their story. So that's one of the things that I found both in previous roles and in this one, because those are questions that I encourage my clients to ask as part of an interview. Is let's not only look at this as a customer, let's look at this as a partner. How do you support each other, within your own objectives, within your careers, within the company? How can you work together more than you might see on the surface?
I love that. It's the seeing it as a partner, because we have this
Yeah.
mindset, I think, in sales that it's something we do to other people, right? I'm going to sell you on this. I'm going to persuade you. I'm going to convince you. But when we look at it as a partnership, then it becomes a collaboration. This is something I'm going to do with you.
Yeah.
So one of the things I might encourage you to do, John, I talk about the what about questions. So when people aren't willing to say, hey, this person's going to be impacted by it, or that person's going to be impacted by it in this way, is to have some what about questions. Well, what about HR? What's their perspective on this particular problem? How does it impact them in their day to day? And when they say, well, I don't really know, well, then I might say, well, this is how I've seen it get impacted in other clients that we've worked with and how it's influenced HR. And you tell them the story and then ask, how do we get them involved in this conversation? What's the best way and the best time to do that? So with those what about questions, you can challenge, because that's, again, what buyers want. They want us to challenge their thinking. Maybe they're not thinking about how this is impacting other people and how those people internally can help to become their champions to make this change happen internally. Because, well, change is hard. It's especially hard if you're trying to do it yourself all alone. All right, I think we have time for one more question, and it's going to be hard for me to pick which one. But let's talk about surveys, shall we? Because I love your latest newsletter where you said, when's the last time you took an online survey and thought, wow, this is great. I feel so valued. Like, what's the deal with surveys? Good, bad? Is there a good way to do these that people actually feel like they want to engage with them? Because I think we're all surveyed out at this point.
Yeah, I think there are a number of issues with surveys. I think the primary issue is, for a lot of companies, it's a checkbox.
Yeah.
Right. Unfortunately. Okay. Yes, everybody to survey, so we need to do a survey. That, if that's your intention, don't. And I mean this genuinely. Don't bother. Just don't bother. The other piece of it is, a lot of companies don't follow up on surveys. Right. So great. We get our feedback from you. It goes into our data set and we're going to crunch the numbers and make decisions.
And never hear from you again.
And we never, the big black hole of customer feedback is what I call that. And customers are irritated by that, right? I mean, if I'm going to take my time, even if it's just a 1-question survey, I don't know, what did you do with that? Right. I mean, does my feedback actually mean something to you, or does it not?
Did you actually hear me? Back to that point.
Exactly. That's a great point. Yes. Did you actually hear me?
Mm-hmm.
And so when surveys are a great tool, if used in the right way, and what they are, just like if you look at it from the perspective of marketing, right? Anyone who has, who's been trained or done any education around marketing, you need to be able to deliver a message in multiple different formats. You need to be buyer friendly. It needs to be buyer first. There are some customers who are fine with surveys. They're going to fill that out and they're going to send it back to you. And those customers typically are also customers who are going to be very responsive to a follow-up, to an interview, right? There are other customers who immediately dismiss surveys. They have no interest in doing a survey at all. But if I reach out to schedule a high-touch, one-on-one, 30-minute interview where I'm looking for some deep insight, they are on board. They are willing to have that kind of a conversation. Mm-hmm. So if you look at surveys as the end-all be-all to how I'm going to collect feedback from my customers, wrong, not going to work. If you look at surveys as one tool in a variety of tools that you are going to use to truly connect to the voice of your customer, then they can be useful, and there can be some really great data that you generate from them. But the minute that the completing the survey becomes the intention, you're done. Just don't even bother.
Yeah. It's almost like the survey is a useful tool to give you the clues or the cues as to what you need to be talking to your customers about. So say you do a survey and, you've hopefully worked with Tonya to get those questions, right? Because the questions in the survey matter a lot, because there isn't that conversation. And then using that to then be able to understand, what is the overall sentiment, and if you have collected names, then being able to reach out to that individual person and say, I'd love to understand more about what you said here. Can we have a conversation? So yes, I totally agree. They have a tool, but to your point, I see so many companies, they're like, we have an NPS score of 90. Great for you.
Okay. What are you doing with that?
Right, right. Yeah, Michael says that they do customer surveys. They send out a short 10-question, and it's designed to give them talking points for a 30-minute interview. That sounds like a great way to do it.
Perfect. That is absolutely fantastic. And hopefully they're reaching out to schedule interviews even with the people who don't answer that 10-question survey, right? I mean, that is your ideal. That is the situation where you have got an opportunity for a great partnership with
Yeah.
that customer. That's a customer that you want to start exploring other options. You want to start thinking out of the box on how you can work together, and not only being a customer, but maybe there's some industry thought leadership opportunities and those sorts of things, right?
Right.
But yeah, make sure that survey is not the barrier to entry to a really valuable conversation.
Yeah, I actually leverage surveys in the writing of Buyer First book, and I'm going into the phase where we're doing advanced readers. And so before I even started writing the book, I did a survey to understand what are the greatest challenges that business owners are facing. And then from that, found people to actually interview to talk to, like, what are the challenges that you face when you think about sales as a business owner, as an individual seller? And those became the key teaching points in the book. And so now going through and doing advanced readers, I'm asking them some similar questions up front as to what is your belief about this beforehand, and then having some questions in one-to-one time with them after they go through the reading to understand, was there a shift? Was there a change? What stuck? What didn't stick? So what I'm hearing you say is that surveys by themselves are, they're a tool, but if you don't pick up the tool and use it effectively, then it's just going to sit there and do nothing for you.
Yeah, it's a data point.
Yeah.
It's a valuable data point, but it's one data point.
And
Yeah.
data points are like excuses. Everybody's got one.
Yeah. That's good. I've never heard that. I love
I
it.
like the way I cleaned that up, because there's another
do.
whole side to that. But
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining me today, Tonya. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you after today's session?
So, well, LinkedIn is fantastic. I am the only Tonya Bjurstrom. Bjurstrom's not like Smith, so I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. You can also check out my website, which is derbysolutions.com, DIRBY solutions.com.
Awesome. And please reach out to Tonya. I know that she is a wealth of information and knowledge as far as customer experience and being buyer first. She is like my sister from another mister as far as buyer first goes. So
I love it. And I cannot wait for the book. I'm so excited.
I thank you so much for joining us. Make sure you follow Tonya on LinkedIn. Reach out to her with your questions. Let her know that you saw her on the Buyer First Ask Me Anything. And join us for our next Buyer First. We're going to be on August 15th. I have another special guest coming. His name is Brent Keltner. He's written a book called The Sales Acceleration Playbook, or Revenue Acceleration Playbook. Sorry, Brent, I got the title wrong. But we're going to be talking all about sales and marketing alignment and strategy, and of course, how to be buyer first in all of it. So Tonya, thank you again for joining us. And until next time, everyone, keep learning and keep sharing out there. Thank you.
Great.